Stick around to see how this nice fading background was made. I'm starting off with some boilerplate HTML and a completely blank CSS file which I included up here in the head. I also have a folder with the images we're gonna be using. I got these from Pexels, the links are in the description. To start off, let's make our header. And also make our H1 and P elements. This is all we need for now. Let's hop on over to our CSS and style them up a bit. I'm setting the header to assume the full height of the viewport using 100 viewport height or VH. I'm using display flex, which will allow me to very easily center the content within. Setting the flex direction to column since we want the elements to go from top to bottom. Justify content to center on the horizontal axis and align items to center on the vertical axis. Also, let's make the header gray for now. For the H1 and P elements, I'm simply adjusting the font size and color. Now here we have some issues, right? Notice how the header doesn't completely fill the window. We have some white edges around the header. This is happening because some elements have default margins and paddings. We don't want that, so let's come back here to the top and remove all margins and paddings from all elements. There we go. Let's add our background now. A logical thing to do would be to just add a background image to our header and then set a transition to fade between different images. And this technically does work, but only in certain browsers. This means a sizable portion of our users will not get the fade effect, but a hard jump from one background to another. So we can't use this approach, so let's get rid of that and also this background color. Instead, we will add a div with a class of backgrounds container, inside of which we will have a bunch of image elements. Each image element will have a class of background, and of course a source with a path to the image. I'll add 3 backgrounds here, but with this technique you can have as many as you please. Just don't forget to specify a new picture for each one. Now let's just add absolute positioning to the container, as well as stretch it across the header. And since this will hold backgrounds, we want a negative z index, for example -5, so it appears behind all other elements. Similar things for the background element, but no need to specify the z index since it's already defined on its parent. And there we go. There's a couple of problems here though. All of our images are stacked up on one another. The image itself is stretched out and it's a little too bright for the white text. It kind of looks unprofessional, so let's see how we can deal with that. To darken the background, we will make a transparent black overlay using the header before element. We specify the content as an empty string since we don't want any text. We apply an absolute position and stretch it across the header. We add a black background color and low opacity. And since we want this overlay to appear in front of the background but behind the text, let's set a negative z index here, like -1. Make sure this z index isn't lower than the background container one. To make the image fit the size of the container without stretching, we use the object fit property and set it to cover. Finally, we don't want all images to appear at once stacked on one another. We only want one image at a time. For this, we will use opacity, setting it to 0 to begin with. We also add the transition for opacity so we can fade it later. Now let's also make a class called showing, which we will use to show an image by setting its opacity to 1. I like to imagine the showing class like a magical crown. The image that gets the crown is the one that gains the ability to show itself. Now let's grant that ability to our first image. Awesome. Now we're ready to start automatically giving the images the showing class, and with that, start looping through them. To do this, we will write just a tiny bit of JavaScript. I'm creating a new file and calling it main.js. And I'm just gonna go down to the bottom of the body in our HTML and include it using the script tag. Now we can start programming. So what do we want to do? We want to periodically change the currently showing background by taking the showing class away from one and giving it to the next background. A good place to start is getting all of our backgrounds, that is our image elements. To do this, let's make a variable called header backgrounds, and using the document.querySelectorAll function, get all elements with the class of background. Let's also make a variable that will hold the index of the currently showing background and call it image_index. That should start at 0, since by default we have our first background showing. Now let's make a function called changeBackground that will take care of giving and taking the showing class. First of all, we need to remove the showing class from the current background. We do that by indexing the header backgrounds array using square brackets. We are looking for the currently showing element, so one at image_index. We access its class list and remove the showing class. Next up, we want to increment the value of the image_index by 1, so it now points to the next background. But what happens if we're already on the last element and we try to get the next one? Well, our code would break and give us an error. So we can't have that, so let's just make sure that if our image_index is equal or greater to the number of elements, or length, in our header backgrounds array, the image_index is set back to 0. And now we can get our next background by indexing the header backgrounds array at image_index position. We get its class list, and we add the showing class. That's all we need this function to do. Now we just need to call this function every few seconds. To do this, we write setInterval and pass in a couple parameters. First off, the name of our function, so changeBackground, and then the milliseconds we want to pass between each change. I will put 3000 here, so 3 seconds for demonstration purposes, but it definitely looks better if you put it at 6 or more seconds. With that, we're done with JavaScript. Let's see if it works. Okay, so that looks good. We got the backgrounds to fade in and out on their own, and they look nicely. However, notice how there's a bit of gray when the images fade. That's our default body showing underneath while the backgrounds fade in and out. And personally, I don't like that. I want one background to fade directly into the next. So I came up with a fix. All we have to do is modify the showing class a little bit. We want its z-index to be -1, so when it appears it will be behind the previous background. Also, we don't want it to animate at all. This means that when we start showing the background, it will not fade in, just pop in behind the previous background. The previous one will fade out to reveal our new background behind. Let's take a look. That's much nicer. See how easy that is to implement, but so effective. And with a little bit of extra work, you can have your landing page look something like this. So go on and use these fading backgrounds to add a touch of extra personality to your projects. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like and subscribe for more videos like this. See you in the next one.